And welcome back to Music Free Static. I hope you're having a fabulous day. And I've been on a movie kick lately. I admit it. It's been fun. But today, it's time for a really late book review as I dive into The Killer Angels by Michael Shaara. Okay. All right. I will also talk about the movie Gettysburg, which was based on the book. But mostly we're going to talk about the book, which is amazing. It won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1975, if you care about such things. The Killer Angels tells the story of the Battle of Gettysburg from the perspective of really four people. You get General James Longstreet of the Confederate, he was Lieutenant General of the Army of Northern Virginia. You've got General Robert E. Lee, who of course was over the Army as a whole. And then also tells it from the perspective of General John Buford, who was of the United States Cavalry, and Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who was in command of the 20th Maine of the U.S. Army of the Potomac. So what you're seeing is the Battle of Gettysburg from these four different perspectives. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, Civil War, we're out. Okay, fair. Now, I happen to enjoy military histories. This book is right up my alley. But it hits for a couple of reasons, because Shaara wrote the book based off of the journals and writings and accounts of the battle. So this isn't some... I guess it's not really a fictionalized view of the war. The characterizations, of course, are fictional because he wasn't there, doesn't know what the conversations actually were, right? Okay. But based off of all of the accounts from Longstreet and Chamberlain and Lee and Pickett and all of this stuff, right? He built a novel that, one, is interesting, but two, really builds off of the... or really builds the idea of what was it like to actually be at the Battle of Gettysburg. And it's really cool in how it dives into the characters. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but here's, if you've never read about the Battle of Gettysburg during the United States Civil War, okay, that's fair, I suppose. If you're in the U.S., you should have studied this, okay, in school, but, you know, who knows what they're teaching in schools these days. But here's the general setup, okay? So you can so you understand what I'm talking about as we go through the book, okay? Leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg, you had the Army of Northern Virginia, right? This is the Confederate Army. They have started on an offensive campaign for the first time in the war. And they are pushing up through Pennsylvania in the hopes of drawing out the American Union Army and then either destroying them in the north or maneuvering behind them so they could cut them off from Washington, D.C. in the hopes of forcing some form of peace treaty. Okay? That was the idea. So here you've got the Army of Northern Virginia. They're moving north. The army is large. We're talking like 80,000 men, something like that. It was huge. Certainly by 1860 standards. And so it's moving north, and it's split, taking a couple of different roads, and they are converging on Gettysburg. You also have now the Army of the Potomac, which is looking for the Southern Army to try to stop them. Now, remember, this is 1865, 6, something like that. Sorry, I forgot the exact date. It's 1860s, right? We're not dealing with satellite, reconnaissance and all this stuff. We're dealing with spies, right? We're dealing with cavalry, and that's sort of about it, right? And cavalry was the key for a lot of these armies because they could move fast, right? Certainly a lot faster than somebody on foot. And it was the cavalry that was supposed to be running out ahead of the army to figure out where is the other army. Okay, because it turns out Pennsylvania is large, at least large enough that even an army of 80,000 or 120,000 men is easy to lose. Okay, so this is what's happening. So you got the Army of Northern Virginia that is coming, surprisingly enough, they're coming into Gettysburg from the north because they've sort of looped up and around. You got the Army of the Potomac, which has moved up from Washington, D.C., and is eventually moves up into Gettysburg. What you end up having, words are hard. What ends up happening is General Buford, who is in command of Union cavalry, sees the rebel army coming in. So he decides to take up position on the heights north of Gettysburg and hold those hills so that to try to stop the Confederate army so the Union can come up and stop them there. Otherwise, his fear, and this, you get this through the movie and through the book, was that his fear was that then the South would end up taking these hills, and there's no way the Union would be able to move them. Okay. So he gets up there and holds. The Union Army gets the message, hey, we need you in Gettysburg now. And the soonest now you could make it. And eventually they move up. Okay. And that's what sets up the Battle of Gettysburg, as you get the chaos of war, which is fun because as you read through the book, especially if you read through the book, you realize that the Battle of Gettysburg was not a battle that anybody wanted. Okay, Lee definitely didn't want a battle there at Gettysburg. What he wanted to do was maneuver around to a place where he could choose the battleground. The Union would either have to attack him or surrender. And that's not what happened here at Gettysburg. So you end up with this really fun story. Now, as I said, this book tells the story of the Battle of Gettysburg from a number of different perspectives. Mostly those four I mentioned before: Longstreet, Lee, Buford, and Chamberlain. You do get a couple of chapters of, oh, here's this guy. He was a spy for the Confederate Army, and that's how he knew, or that's how the Confederates knew where the Union was, because their cavalry, Jeb Stuart, who was in command of the cavalry for the Confederate Army, was off somewhere else. Okay, leaving Lee's army blind, as they put it. But as the battle sets up, right, and the book lays this out, you get a real focus on the interplay between Longstreet and Lee. Now, there is, I think, a little bit of let's call it bias. Okay, the book loves Longstreet and is not overly happy with Lee. And I think this is in part because a lot of where this came from was the collective writings of Longstreet. And he was not happy with how Lee was conducting this campaign into the North. Okay. It also portrays Lee as sort of an aging, which he was dealing with heart disease. I think he may have been having a mild heart attack, actually, around the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. But Lee died eventually of heart problems. So the fact that he was having them at this point was not surprising. But regardless, you get a lot of that interplay of the arguments and discussions and what are we doing and why are we here and why do we do this? why is the Confederate Army attacking and all of that stuff. Okay. There's also a little bit of discussion of why they were fighting in the first place. Okay. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Of course, the other side focuses on Chamberlain and the 20th Maine. Now, the Army of the Potomac was 120,000 people. Chamberlain's 20th Maine was about 260. Okay. Just before the Battle of Gettysburg, there was a situation with the second Maine, which was being disbanded because the 2 years were up for that unit, except for these 130 guys who had signed 3-year enlistment papers instead of 2-year enlistment papers. And now they were kind of stuck. They didn't want to keep fighting. They wanted to go home. Their 2 years was up, they thought. Well, they got absorbed into the 20th Maine, and how that happens is actually really cool. So, okay, great. So here's the 20th Maine, which started the war with 1,600 people. They're down now to, with the second Maine guys, 300 and something, right? The American Civil War was bloody. Okay, it was interesting because it was a transition in warfare, which I won't get into it in detail. It's definitely worth studying if you're into military history at all. But you went from prior to the American Civil War, where people would stand on a field and just shoot at each other, right, to what was developed in part by the tactics of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, right? They built a campaign based off of trench warfare, which persisted through World War I, right? And it ends up being a really bloody mess, okay? Literally and figuratively, okay? But Chamberlain's 20th Maine holds an interesting distinction because Chamberlain won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his role and the role of the 20th Maine during the Battle of Gettysburg. They were moved up to a hill called Little Round Top, all right, which was the far left end, I believe it was, of the Union lines. And the Confederates tried to come up that way. And he made some choices there which were pretty, which ended up being a huge deciding factor in the war, okay? Or at least in this battle, but really in the war. The Battle of Gettysburg was the turning point of the American Civil War. It was the decisive battle. The war went on for another couple of years after it, but the reality is whoever won at the Battle of Gettysburg was going to win the war. Either the Confederates were going to be weakened and the Union could defeat them, which is what actually happened, or the Union Army would have been destroyed or stopped, and the Confederates would have been able to move around them and take Washington, D.C., which probably would have ended the war as well. Okay, so again, we're talking about the deciding battle of the American Civil War. All right, so let's talk about this and some of the characters and what's going on, because it's fascinating, some of the discussions that went on within the Union or the Confederate Army of why do they attack when the Union is holding this amazing defensive position. And honestly, there's a little bit of the discussion, not a lot, okay, which is, I think, is interesting, but there's a little bit of discussion on why both sides were fighting the war, right? You have the Confederate Army, who are, as a whole, they're fighting for their rights, the rights of their states, and their homes, right? They were, now, yes, you can say, oh, they were fighting for their slaves. Yes, slavery was a huge argument, especially for the North. They were fighting to end slavery. From the Southern perspective, slavery was part of it, but a lot of the people who were fighting weren't fighting because of the slaves. They were fighting because they thought that their rights were being violated by the Union. Okay, you can get into the arguments of how that goes, but there's some interesting discussion about all of those perspectives, and it's really, really interesting. Okay, but as you dive into the books, it gives you a really good view of what all was going on at the time, because it said the American Civil War was a messy affair, and the Union, which should have really won this war fairly quickly in some ways, was hindered by politicians and leadership changes and a bunch of other stuff, and you get to see some of that here in this book. Just before the Battle of Gettysburg, the commanding general of the Army of the Potomac was changed out from Hooker, I think it was, to Meade. And General Meade said he had just taken command. In the South, or for the Southern Army, for Lee, he's looking at this as like, well, the previous generals were incompetent. Meade is cautious, because remember, these guys know each other. They were in the same army for a long time, right? But he says, okay, Meade will be cautious. He's just taken command. He doesn't know what's going on. This is our time to strike. And you get from Chamberlain's perspective. You get sort of the lower ranks view of what the heck is going on. And there's a great line in the movie in Gettysburg. It's like, the new commanding general is George Meade. The latest as they come down the line. Or it's some really sarcastic, snarky, is like delivered in this sort of Irish brogue that the character has. It's like, yeah. It's like, all right, here's the same boss, same as the old boss, right? You get that type of feeling. But it's fascinating to dive into some of this. Now, the 20th Maine got thrown into the meat grinder. Okay. They're up there at Little Round Top, and they were, as I said, the end of the line, which for 1860s and warfare in the 1860s, right? And actually even modern warfare, if you can get around the side, the flank of an army and get behind them, you can wreak havoc on the army that you're attacking. And it was the job of the 20th Maine to hold the end of the line to keep the Confederates from coming up and just washing right on over the Union line. And he's up there at the top of the hill, and it's a great hill to defend, right? They are doing work there. It's great. They've got a lot of rocks there, and it turns out rocks are really good at stopping bullets, okay? It's just, they're really good at that. But they're up there, and they are seriously outnumbered, as they've got, 2 regiments of I think they're from Alabama, but coming up this hill at them. And the 20th Maine runs out of ammo. They are running out of bullets. So Chamberlain, who's been wounded, he took a bullet shell or a rock, something in his ankle. That's, he's dealing with an injury there. His unit is just, they're dying and out of ammo. What else are we going to do? And he orders the unit to fix bayonets, and they charge down the hill, and they swing and drive the Confederate army into the fire of the New York and Pennsylvania units that were to the right of them. Okay. But what goes into, hey, we are stuck here, we have nothing left. we can't shoot at them anymore, and they just keep coming. So what do we do? And Chamberlain ordered a charge, and there we go. A little bit of history on Chamberlain, which is he was promoted rather quickly after this, as he's going through the rest of the Civil War. And I believe it was Chamberlain who was there to accept Lee's surrender at Appomattox, which ended the war. And Chamberlain, when he accepted the surrender, ordered the Union soldiers to salute the Confederate Army, to show them respect rather than taunt or belittle them. It was a really, really generous action by Chamberlain. But anyway, back to Gettysburg. You get this sweep down the hill, this charge down the hill, and it breaks the Confederate attack, and they eventually fall back. Now, there's more to that attack that you don't really read about even in the book, but there happened later. I was reading about it last night because I fell down the Gettysburg rabbit hole. I just had to go read about all this stuff, which apparently Chamberlain had one unit that was about 30 people maybe, but 14 of them were sharpshooters that had repeating rifles instead of the flintlocks and I guess it wasn't flintlocks, but I'm blanking on the type of rifle it was, but where they had to use the ramrod and shove it down, the bullet down the barrel and all that stuff. No, these had repeating rifles, which were just starting to roll up, and they come sweeping up the hill. Are these guys with the repeating rifles? They managed to get down behind the Confederates and shoot at them from behind, and that's what really got the rebels thinking they were now not just under attack from this charge, but seriously outnumbered, and they fled, and it was cool. Anyway, so the 20th Maine sweeps down, stops the battle, and everything's great. But you get all of the discussion of what's going on here. What are the choices that get made in battle? As the shots are flying, what do you do? And seeing into Chamberlain's mind is, hey, we're about to be overrun. I'm going to order my younger brother to fill a hole so we don't get overrun. And how much it was the thing, it was what had to happen. But he's ordering his brother potentially to his death, right? You dive into those thoughts of what do we do in the heat of battle? The other side of it, which is really fascinating in some ways, the American Civil War, they talk about pitting brother against brother, right? Which in some cases was the literal truth. But one of those cases was between General Lewis Armistead, Lowe, they often called him, who was commanded a division under General Pickett. His best friend in the world, the person he was closest to besides his wife, was General Winfield Hancock, who was in command of a division of the Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg. This was the first time they would ever meet in battle. And what is it like to contemplate having to potentially fight and possibly either directly or indirectly have to kill your friend? I mean, they were closer than brothers in a lot of ways. I mean, they were just inseparable until the war. And so there's a lot of that discussion of what is that mindset? And they're soldiers. Armistead's going to do his duty. But he is fearing that he's ever going to end up causing harm to Hancock. The reality ends up being is, yes, they charge. Armistead makes it up to the Union lines, dies not far from where Hancock is also dying. Right, these are some of those stories that, yeah, you could talk about all of the military aspects of the battle, which, again, I love to dive into, and I try not to as much as I can here. But that look at the characters, and these are real people, okay? This isn't just some a person that the author that Shaara just thought up out of whole cloth. Oh, what if? This was reality. The other thing you dive into is Pickett's charge. Now, this was a bad decision. There are a lot of bad calls by the Confederate Army here. But one of them is to bring General Pickett and his division and have them charge across a mile of open terrain into a fortified defense. And Pickett's division gets just obliterated. He lost a lot of his division in that attack. And it shows him as how excited he is to finally get into the battle, because his unit was the end. It was at the end of the line for the Confederate Army. They were bringing up the tail. They have been out of the fight. They've missed everything, and Pickett's excited. Yes, we finally get to go fight in this war, and it's insane. But you know who they end up charging into in the middle of the Union line? The freaking 20th Maine, because the general up there for the Army of the Potomac, for the Union, they decide, okay, you did a great job holding the hill. Let's get you out of here. We're going to put you right in the center of the line. It'll be safe, because they're just the Confederates are only attacking the ends. It'll be a nice place for you guys to sort of chill and heal and recover. Maybe get food, which turns out is a little bit of a problem. But no, what happens? The 20th Maine is right in the middle of the line, right where Pickett's divisions are focusing their attacks. These guys had the worst possible luck of just about anybody in the Union Army that day. But Shaara, as he go through the book, you really feel what it's like to fight in this type of war on both sides, okay? And one of the things I like about Shaara's book is it doesn't take sides, okay? Aside from Lee and Longstreet, right? It seems to really think Lee was an idiot and Longstreet was just the greatest guy ever. But it doesn't take sides between the North and the South, okay? Which I think is a really good way of telling this particular story. Yes, you can go into the politics of slavery and states' rights and all of that stuff, okay? Which, from a political science perspective, is fascinating, okay? Slavery is an abhorrent practice, and, you know, the British and a few of the others who brought slavery to the United States deserve all of the disdain that that should be heaped upon them for that. But all of that said, you can start diving into the arguments of, well, this should the federal government be able to tell them that slavery is wrong, all of this stuff, right? I'm not going to get into it here, but that is a fascinating discussion. That this, other than talking about the perspectives, doesn't pick sides, okay? And I like that for this story, because what this is telling is the human story of the people who chose to fight for the Union and the Confederacy. And you see the horrors of the war and what this was like. Okay. Now, I've been focusing mostly on the book because Shaara's book, The Killer Angels, really dives into this. But what's great, the movie Gettysburg, which was made in 1993, and it stars Martin Sheen and I forgot who was it that was playing Chamberlain? Jeff Daniels and Sam Elliott, who plays Buford, and a bunch of amazing actors. Okay. The movie, it's a long movie. It's like 3.5 hours or something like that. It's a long movie. Apparently it's originally made to be a miniseries, but then I think they cut it down for the theaters. And I've got a copy of it on DVD. I don't remember if it's the shorter or longer version of it, but it is amazing. And you really see what's going on in a way that you don't always get from the books. Okay. Now, the movie, again, follows the books very closely. I can't remember which one I had seen. I think I'd read The Killer Angels. I think I'd read that first. And then when I saw Gettysburg and I heard some of the lines from the movie, or from the book, quoted in the movie, it's like, oh, I wonder if this is from that book I like. And yeah, turns out absolutely was. Okay. But there are some aspects of the movie which are phenomenal, that really help you feel what it was like to be in this, that the book doesn't necessarily convey. And most of it is, I mean, you see what it was like for Chamberlain and the 20th Maine up on Little Round Top, which, again, that's pretty amazing. But then you sit and watch, prior to Pickett's charge, Longstreet ordered the cannons, I guess Lee also, but they ordered the cannons to focus fire on the center of the Union line. And so they just had every cannon just lined up, one after another, just battering the Union line. And to see that on the screen, especially if you've got a good screen with a good sound system, oh, this would have been amazing to see in a theater. But you look at this, it's like, okay, yes, this is intense. But you can also feel the impending doom of Pickett's charge, right? Longstreet lays out, both in the book and in the movie, what's going to happen. He says, I can see it. They're going to, because he's arguing against making this charge. It's like, we've got a mile of open ground. They're going to watch us the whole time. Their cannons are going to be trained on us. We're going to stop here because there's a fence. We've got to dismantle the fence. And while we're stopped here, we're right under the guns of everybody on the top of the hill. And then, if there's anybody still together, the Union are dug in behind a stone wall at the top of this hill. We're going to get our meat munched. And they do. But to watch that happen as Pickett and his divisions work their way up this mile of open field right into the center of the Union Army, it really, really lets you feel the horrors of this, right? I mean, the charge was, brave or not, it was a disaster. Okay. And Pickett was never the same after that, as I understand it. But that aspect of the movie, of actually seeing what the combat was like, it goes beyond the pages of the book. Right? Shaara does an amazing job in The Killer Angels laying this out. But it's different seeing it through your imagination in the book to actually seeing it on film. And it is so good. And the actors are amazing. Okay. The actors do a tremendous job, and there are more epic beards than you will ever see anywhere because it was the Civil War. I mean, if you want to see, all right, Longstreet's got this long beard that comes down to his chest. Jeff Daniels, right? Chamberlain, he's got this big epic mustache, right? That comes. Okay, there is more epic facial hair than you'll ever see anywhere. But, and as someone who's new to the facial hair game, right? There's, they were creative with their facial hair. The American Civil War, the mutton chops were all over the place. But still, it is amazing to see. And I'll tell you, the book, The Killer Angels, does a better job of diving into the minds of the characters, which you would expect. But Gettysburg, as a movie, really shows the intensity of what it was like to fight that war. So I recommend both of them. Okay, they're both amazing. But if you're looking for something, said it's not a happy book, right? It's not like something that's dark and depressing, but it is a serious drama of life and death and war. And I recommend watching Gettysburg or reading The Killer Angels, or do both. I honestly understood it a little bit better because I got lost when I first read The Killer Angels in what's where and what's going on, even though they include some pretty good maps in the book. It helped for me seeing it on film, right? Seeing the movie first and then going back and reading the book and understanding a little bit more about who the players were and what was going on. Because yeah, I got a little bit lost when I first read The Killer Angels, but they're both amazing. I highly recommend both of them. So check that out, and let me know. Are you into military history? Do you like war? No, I mean, let me know. Have you seen Gettysburg or read The Killer Angels? Let me know. Drop a comment here on YouTube or on Spotify. And until next time, be excellent to each other. And this is Music Free Static signing off.